I want to tell you about the man who tried to save $125,000 by firing me on a Thursday, and how he found out 4 days later that spreadsheets don't erase paper trails. My name's Derek Coyle, Sales Director, Halbrook Freight Systems, 6 years in. I ran the West Corridor accounts, the big logistics contracts that took 8 months to close and paid the company millions once they landed. My comp plan had a clean structure: base salary, quarterly commission, and an annual retention bonus tied to book of business retained through December 31st. That bonus was the number that mattered. $125,000 written into my offer letter, restated every year in my comp review, signed by HR and by the man who ran the sales division, Warren Trask. Warren hired. First year, he took me to lunch after I closed the Delacroix account and told me I had the kind of patience that makes rich men. I believed him, because for 5 years the math backed it up. Every December the bonus hit. Every January, Warren shook my hand and said, "Next year we go bigger." Year 6 was different. I closed the biggest account of my career in October, a 3-year distribution contract with a regional grocery chain worth over $4 million annually. That deal alone should have made my December bonus a formality. Instead, starting in November, Warren got quiet, canceled 2 one-on-ones, started copying legal on emails he used to just send to me. I noticed, but I didn't panic. I'd been through a leadership shuffle 2 years earlier, and watched Warren trim 2 other directors' bonuses using performance documentation that showed up out of nowhere in the final quarter. Convenient memos, retroactive coaching. I filed that away and did something neither of those men had done. I started keeping my own copy of everything. Every email, every closed deal, every performance review, backed up to a personal drive, dated and organized. Not because I expected trouble, because I'd learned that companies write history the week they need it. The second week of December, Warren called me into his office at 4 in the afternoon, a time slot that never appeared on his calendar for anything good. He had a folder in front of him and a woman I didn't recognize sitting to his right, introduced only as someone from HR. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't do the thing where he leaned back and made a joke about the Cowboys losing again. He opened the folder and told me my employment was being terminated, effective immediately. Repeated failure to follow company reporting protocols, he said, sliding 2 printed emails across the desk, both dated the first week of November, both alleging I'd missed submission deadlines on account documentation. I'd never seen either email before. I read them twice while he watched me, arms crossed, doing a poor job of hiding that he already knew how this would end. I asked one question. Does this termination affect my December retention bonus? He almost smiled. Termination for cause voids bonus eligibility per Section 4 of your compensation agreement, he said, like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. HR will have your final check and separation paperwork by Friday. Security will walk you out. I looked at the 2 emails again, then at him. Then I said something that clearly wasn't. Warren, I never received either of these emails, and I think you know that, because I kept copies of every message you and I exchanged since October, time-stamped, backed up off the company's server the day I closed the grocery contract. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and reached for my phone. Before I walk out, I'm going to make one call. You're going to want to be in the building for it. He told me to sit back down. I didn't. I walked to the glass wall of his office, dialed a number I'd saved under a name that wasn't a name, just 3 letters, and said 4 words into the phone that made the HR woman's pen stop moving mid-sentence. "He's ready for you." The door opened before Warren finished standing up. Marcus Kwan walked in wearing a gray suit and the calm of a man who bills $300 an hour and has never once been surprised. I'd met Marcus 2 years back at a friend's wedding, found out he did employment litigation, and kept his card in my wallet the way you keep a spare tire. Not because you plan to need it, because you know roads. I'd called him from the parking garage the week Warren canceled our second one-on-one. Told him what I was seeing. He said the same thing twice. Document everything. Don't quit. Don't sign anything. So I hadn't. I'd built a folder instead, and 3 days ago, sensing the walls closing in a certain way people sense weather, I'd asked him to be reachable this week. He'd told me to just say the word and he'd be in the lobby within 20 minutes. I said it. He was here in 18. Warren's face did something I hadn't seen from him in 6 years. It went through confusion, then recognition, then a kind of controlled panic dressed up as annoyance. "Who exactly are you?" he asked, though his tone said he already had a guess. Marcus set a leather folder on the desk, opened it without hurry, and introduced himself as my counsel. He said he understood there was a termination in progress involving allegations of missed reporting deadlines, and he'd like to see the original emails referenced, the ones with full header information, not the printed copies sitting on the desk. Warren said the emails were sent from the shared sales inbox, and he didn't have the originals in front of him right now. Marcus nodded slowly, the way a man nods when someone hands him exactly the rope he was hoping for. "That's interesting," he said, "because Derek's copies, pulled from his own archived account, the same day each of these was allegedly sent, show no record of either message arriving. Not in his inbox, not in spam, not in the deleted folder. I'd be glad to have our forensic examiner compare metadata whenever it's convenient for help." The HR woman, whose name I finally caught as Priya, looked at Warren like she was recalculating something in real time. She hadn't written those emails. That much was obvious from her face. She'd been handed a folder that morning and told this was routine. Warren tried a different angle. He said the termination stood regardless, based on performance, and the emails were supplementary. I want you to understand something about Warren Trask. He was never stupid. He was just used to nobody checking his math. For 6 years, I'd been the guy who closed the deals and said thank you at the holiday party. He built his whole approach to me on that pattern continuing forever. "Let's talk performance then," Marcus said, and pulled a second document from his folder. Derek's last 4 performance reviews, all rated exceeds expectations, all signed. His closed revenue this fiscal year, 31% above quota, including a $4 million annual contract closed 6 weeks ago. I don't see the shape of a performance problem here. I see the shape of a bonus obligation somebody wanted to avoid paying 2 weeks before it came due. That's when I felt the first real crack of anger since I'd sat down in that office. And I want to be honest about it, because up to that point, I'd been running on adrenaline and instinct, not feeling much of anything. Watching Marcus lay it out clean and cold made the whole shape of it land on me at once. 6 years. Every deal I'd stayed late for. Every client dinner on my own dime because the expense process was slow. Every Christmas, Warren shook my hand like we were building something together. And somewhere in a locked office, probably in late October, right after I closed the grocery contract, he'd decided the cheapest move was to erase me before. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I asked him one thing. Warren, did you write those 2 emails yourself this week and backdate them? He didn't answer. Priya answered for him in a voice that had gone flat and careful. I need to see the original email server logs before this termination proceeds any further. That's not optional. Warren said this was getting out of hand, that he'd simply followed a process, that these things happen fast at year-end. Marcus closed his folder, which somehow looked more threatening closed than open. He said Halbrook was welcome to proceed however it liked, but that any termination finalized today, on the record we now had, would be treated as retaliatory, timed specifically to avoid a 6-figure contractual bonus, and that his firm would be filing within the week if the company chose that path. He said it the way a man reads a weather report. No heat in it. Warren looked at me then, and for 1 second, something almost human crossed his face. Something close to the man who'd bought me lunch after Delacroix. Then it closed back up, and he said the words that told me everything about who he was underneath the handshakes. This is exactly why I never trusted you, he said. You've been building a file on me the whole time. I told him the truth, calm, because I finally understood something clean and simple standing in that office. I built a file on the job, Warren. You built the reason I needed one. Security never came. Nobody walked me out. Instead, Priya asked everyone to step out except Marcus, Warren, and herself, and said she needed 48 hours to review the personnel file before any further action. I left the building on my own 2 feet, through the front door, past the reception desk where I used to grab a coffee every morning for 6 years. And I didn't look back once. Because for the first time all week, I didn't need to. 48 hours turned into 5 days, and those 5 days did something to me I hadn't expected. The anger from Warren's office burned off fast, the way anger always does once the audience is gone, and underneath it I found something slower and heavier waiting. I sat in my house on the first night, phone off, and let myself count the years. 6 of them. I'd missed my brother's 40th birthday for a client dinner in year 3. I'd worked from a hospital waiting room the day my father had his hip replaced because a contract renewal landed the same afternoon, and Warren had called it a defining moment for the quarter. I used to tell myself that was sitting in my kitchen with the lights off. I understood it differently. It was a man building his own cage and calling it a career. My wife Renata found me there around 10, still in my work clothes, staring at nothing. She didn't ask what happened right away. She just sat down across from me and waited, which is one of the reasons I married her. When I finally talked, I told her everything. The backdated emails, Marcus walking in, Warren's face when he realized I'd kept receipts on him for 2 months. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she asked one question that cracked something open in me. Derek, how long did you know this was coming? I sat with that for longer than I wanted to admit. The honest answer was months. I'd felt Warren pulling away since October, felt the meetings get shorter, felt the tone in his emails go from warm to procedural, and some old, tired part of me had chosen to call it a busy season. I had built a legal file because some instinct in me refused to be blindsided completely. But I hadn't protected the part of me that still wanted Warren to be the man who bought me lunch after Delacroix. I had been hoping right up until the moment he slid those printed emails across his desk. That was the real slap, not the firing, the hoping. I thought about my father, who'd spent 31 years at a manufacturing plant and got a watch and a handshake when arthritis finally took his hands. He used to say loyalty was a two-way street, and I used to nod along at Thanksgiving without really hearing him. Sitting in my kitchen that night, I heard him. Loyalty only works as a two-way street if both people are driving the same direction. I'd been driving toward Warren's numbers for 6 years. He'd been driving toward whatever protected his budget, and the day those two things diverged, he didn't hesitate for 1 second before trying to erase me. The next morning, I called Marcus and asked him something that had been sitting in my chest since the office. Not what happens to Warren. What happens to me going forward if I want out completely. Not reinstatement. Out. Marcus told me something I hadn't fully considered under the adrenaline of that Thursday. He said retaliatory termination claims, especially ones this clean, this documented, this obviously timed around a bonus payout, rarely end with the employee going back to a desk next to the man who tried to erase them. Companies settle those fast and quiet, because a jury hearing about backdated emails 2 weeks before a 6-figure bonus vests is not a jury that likes the company. He said if I wanted, we could push for full separation, full bonus, and damages for the retaliation itself, instead of asking to keep working under Warren Trask. Hearing him say it out loud made the decision simple in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't want Warren's approval, his lunches, his handshake at the holiday party. I wanted what was owed to me, and then I wanted a door between us that never opened again. I told Marcus to push for full separation and full payout, no negotiation on going back. He said that was the cleanest version of this to litigate anyway, and that he'd already heard through a contact that Hallbrook's outside counsel was nervous because the internal review Priya opened had turned up more than just my file. That was the first I heard about the other names. Marcus said Priya's 48-hour review had, according to his contact, widened into something bigger once she started pulling personnel records from the past 2 years. 2 other directors, the ones I'd watched get quietly trimmed during the leadership shuffle, had bonus disputes in their files too. Similar shape, similar timing, similar convenient documentation appearing right before. I sat with that for a long minute. I hadn't set out to expose a pattern. I'd set out to protect one bonus, mine, because I'd learned the hard way 6 years ago that nobody protects it for you. But sitting there, hearing that Warren's habit hadn't started with me and might not have ended with me either, something shifted. This wasn't just about getting my number back anymore. It was about making sure the next man in that chair, the one who trusted his director the way I used to, didn't have to learn the same lesson at his own kitchen table with the lights off. I called Renata into the room and told her the new plan: full separation, full payout, and whatever else Marcus found while he was in there. She didn't tell me to calm down or to think it over. She just nodded once, The way people nod when they already know you've made the right call and said, "Good, now eat something. You've had 2 protein bars in 3 days." The internal review Priya opened didn't stay internal for long. 2 weeks after I walked out of Warren's office for the last time, Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning with a tone I hadn't heard from him before. Not the calm courtroom voice. Something closer to a man watching a house of cards go down exactly the way he predicted. Just faster. Halbrook's outside counsel had reached out requesting a settlement conference. Not a negotiation, a conference, which Marcus said was corporate lawyer language for, "We already know how this ends, and we'd like to stop the bleeding before it gets worse." He explained what had happened on their end, pieced together from filings and one very talkative former colleague of Priya's who wasn't under any confidentiality agreement yet. Priya's review of my file had led her to pull email server logs for the 2 missed deadline messages Warren. The forensic timestamp showed both had been created and sent internally the same week as my termination meeting, then manually inserted into an archived folder to appear dated in early November. In plain terms, Warren hadn't just fired me on false grounds. He'd manufactured evidence and put his own name on the send line. That alone would have been enough to sink him. It wasn't the whole story. Priya, once she saw what she was looking at, didn't stop with my file. She pulled the 2 other directors from the leadership shuffle 2 years back, the ones I'd noticed but never had proof on, and found the same pattern stitched through both. Manufactured performance notes appearing in the final quarter before bonus vesting. One of the 2 directors, a woman named Colette Ferris, who'd left the company under what she'd been told was a mutual parting, had signed a severance agreement with a confidentiality clause, believing her own performance had genuine. She hadn't known until Marcus's contact reached out carefully through her old assistant that the notes behind her exit had been backdated the same way mine were. That detail was the one that made me angry again, angrier than sitting in Warren's office had. I could live with what he tried to do to me. I'd fought back. I'd had the sense to keep records. I'd walked out with my dignity and a lawyer who knew his business. Colette hadn't had that chance. She'd signed away her right to even question it, believing a lie about her own work that Warren had built specifically so she wouldn't fight. Marcus told me Halbrook's board had gotten involved once general counsel briefed them, and board involvement changes the temperature of everything. A retaliatory termination against one director is a pattern of fabricated performance documentation used to avoid bonus payouts across multiple employees is the kind of thing that ends up in a regulatory inquiry and a very uncomfortable line in next year's proxy statement. 2 weeks after that, Warren Trask was placed on administrative leave, officially pending review of internal processes, which is the corporate version of a man being walked to the parking lot while everyone pretends not to watch. I didn't celebrate that part the way I thought I might. I'd spent 6 years thinking of Warren as smart, careful, 2 steps ahead. Watching him unravel because he couldn't resist backdating 2 emails instead of just letting my bonus vest and figuring out a cleaner exit later just made him look small. Small men do reckless things when they think nobody's checking the math. My own settlement conference happened the following week, over video call. 5 lawyers on Halbrook's side, Marcus and me on ours. I said almost nothing. Marcus had told me beforehand that in these meetings, the client who talks the least usually walks away with the most, because every sentence is a lever the other side can pull on. I sat there in my kitchen, coffee going cold, and watched 5 people in suits try to find a version of this that didn't sound as bad out loud as it was on paper. There wasn't one. By the end of the call, Halbrook's counsel agreed to the full retention bonus, $125,000, paid immediately rather than contested, plus a settlement for the retaliatory termination that Marcus later told me was, in his words, generous enough that they clearly wanted this closed before it reached a filing. I signed nothing that week. I told Marcus I wanted one more thing added before I put my name on anything, and it wasn't. I asked whether Colette's confidentiality agreement, the one she'd signed under false pretenses, could be reopened given the new evidence. Marcus said it was unusual but not impossible, especially with a board already spooked and eager to avoid a pattern lawsuit. He made the call. 2 weeks later, Colette got hers reopened too, her own settlement renegotiated once the fabricated notes behind her exit were laid out plainly for Halbrook's counsel to see. I never met her in person. We spoke once on the phone after both our settlements closed. She thanked me, and I told her the truth, which was that I hadn't done it for her, not at first. I'd done it because once I saw the shape of what Warren built, I couldn't sign my own piece and leave hers broken behind a locked door. She was quiet for a second, then said that was the first decent thing anyone from that building had done for her. Warren Trask was terminated by Halbrook's board 6 weeks after my last day there, officially for violations of company policy regarding personnel documentation, which is corporate language for "we caught you forging records, and we're not going to say so directly." He didn't get a severance. He didn't get a handshake. As far as I ever heard, he didn't get another sales leadership role in this industry either. Because word travels fast among the people who write references, and nobody wanted their name next to his. I got the wire transfer notification on a Wednesday morning in late January. $125,000 landing in my account with the same quiet ping as any other deposit. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just a number that had taken 6 years and one bad Thursday to finally become real. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time before I did anything else. Not because I couldn't believe it, because I finally... Renata came down while I was still sitting there and asked what I wanted to do to celebrate. I told her the truth. Nothing big. I wanted eggs, coffee, and a quiet morning at my own table. Because for the first time in months, nobody owed me anything, and I didn't owe anybody a version of myself that fit their spreadsheet. I took 2 months before I looked at another job. Marcus told me most people in my position rush back into the same industry out of habit, chasing a familiar title, and end up walking into a smaller version of the same trap. I didn't want smaller. I wanted different. I spent the first few weeks doing things I'd quietly given up somewhere around year 3 at Halbrook. I fixed the fence in the backyard myself instead of hiring it out. I drove 4 hours to see my father, sat with him on his porch, and let him talk about the plant for as long as he wanted, without checking my... He asked me, near the end of that visit, whether I was proud of how I'd handled Warren. I told him I wasn't proud of the fight. I was proud that I hadn't needed to raise my voice to win it. When I finally started interviewing again, I did it differently. I asked every company the same question in the first meeting, before salary, before title. How does your bonus structure hold up if the person paying it doesn't want to pay it? Most interviewers looked confused. One CFO at a mid-sized logistics firm named Halden Cross laughed, said that was the smartest first question he'd heard in 15 years of hiring, and spent 20 minutes walking me through exactly how their comp plans were structured and audited. I took that job, not because the number was bigger, though it was, but because he'd answered the question like a man who'd never needed to hide anything. Colette and I stayed in touch. She found a role at a competitor 8 months later, in a division far from anything connected to Halbrook, and told me once, over a short phone call, that she finally stopped having the dream where she was back in that termination meeting, trying to explain herself to people who'd already decided the ending. I understood that dream better than I wanted to. Mine faded slower than I expected, but it faded. Some nights I still saw Warren's face in the second before he realized Marcus was already in the building. I stopped needing to relive it once I understood what that expression was. Not anger. Fear, dressed up as annoyance, from a man who'd built his whole career on nobody checking his math and had finally met someone who did. Halbrook, from what I hear through old contacts, brought in an outside firm to audit every compensation file going back 3 years after the board finished. 2 more discrepancies turned up, smaller than mine and Colette's, both quietly corrected without needing lawyers, because apparently once a company gets caught forging records to dodge a bonus, it develops a sudden and thorough interest in paying people what it owes them. I think about that old version of myself sometimes, the one grinding through hospital waiting rooms and missed birthdays and calling it dedication, and I don't feel embarrassed by him exactly. He worked hard, and he meant it. I just wish somebody had told him earlier that the company will only protect you as far as its own convenience allows, and past that line, you're on your own unless you build the file yourself. Nobody's coming to do that work for you. Not HR, not a boss who buys you lunch after a big close, not a system that assumes good faith on both sides of a sign. These days my rule is simple, and I tell it to anyone who asks how I ended up leaving a company I'd given 6 years to and landing somewhere better within a season. Keep your own records. Trust the relationship, but verify the paper trail, because paper doesn't change its story to protect somebody's budget in December. People do. And when a company shows you exactly what it's willing to do to avoid paying you what you earned, believe it the first time. Don't wait for the second email. Warren Trask, last I heard, is selling insurance 2 states over, a job with no bonus structure worth forging documents over. I don't feel much when I hear his name now. No satisfaction, no lingering anger. Just the flat, settled feeling of a door that closed a long time ago and stayed closed, the way doors are supposed to when you finally learn to lock them yourself.